been assigned a different story every day. This one, I finally have more than a day to work on a story, which is just a different pace than what I'm used to. And so today was more of a prep day. The rest of the week will be more interviews, editing, writing. So I usually like to start my Mondays, if I can, doing that. Now that I have the option, it's a luxury. I've never had that before. It's always been like, here's this fire happening. Here's, crime investigation, a city council meeting on whatever the topic is. And you just kind of have to go in and cover it and learn as much as you can in like minutes. Now, for the first time, I have time to do research, which is a game changer. So yeah, for Spectrum, I cover the Capitol, and I focus. Spectrum airs in LA, so all of LA, Orange County, all of SoCal. And so my focus is to cover whatever the Southern California lawmakers are doing. And so I was hired to build relationships with them and cover whatever laws they pass that affect people in those districts, in those communities. And I'm from Southern California, so it just helped that even though I've been living in Northern California, because I was working for the ABC affiliate before this, I know Southern California very well because I grew up all over LA County and then Anaheim when I started high school. So yeah, my job is to take these laws that legislators pass and hey,
what's Roxy? Sorry.
Hi, Roxy. Oh no, everyone's welcome. And for example, one of the propositions that I'm working on, it's on stem cell research, and you read that in the ballot, you're like, oh, it's kind of boring. But the woman that I'm going to interview, we have all kinds of guests. I love it. The more the merrier. Stem cell research. That's one of the propositions. It's the first one that's going to appear on the ballot. And in 2004, the federal government pretty much said that they were going to ban stem cell funding. So California created its own agency, and they're running out of funds. So that's one of the props on the ballot. They want to keep borrowing money. And I'm interviewing this mom tomorrow from Corona. And she said that if it wasn't for the funding that UCLA got to treat her daughter wouldn't be alive. So I try to humanize these stories and find a human, a character that helps you understand a law or measure better. Because if you just kind of read about it, and I do read the paper, but if you just kind of read about it on the paper, sometimes it just doesn't really impact you, or you're like, oh, this doesn't really affect me. But when you watch, a mom saying this proposition or this funding that was given to help treat my daughter, help save her life, it kind of helps you see things in a different perspective. And then you of course cover the side who opposes whatever it is that you're working on. So that was a very long way of saying what I covered today and kind of getting into my role. But yeah, hope that answered the question.
No, there's so many things. And for most of the people in class, probably just about everyone, you guys voting in your first election, right? Or certainly your first presidential election. So it's important just as citizens, let alone many, budding journalists, media people. There's an education in California, the whole initiative process. But since you talked about human, it was a good segue, because I want to show, as an example, your fire story. So before covering politics for Spectrum, you were in Sacramento, as you mentioned, and maybe you could give us a little setup. I want to show the story that you did from the, forgive me, was it the
fire one? Oh, Mendocino fire.
Mendocino fire. Maybe give a little setup, and then we'll watch it.
Okay, yeah. So as you guys know, California, especially Northern California, the fires have just been terrible and more devastating every year. So this one that I covered was about 2 years ago. It was a Mendocino complex fire, way up north, and about 2.5 hours away from Sacramento. But it was a big deal at the time. It was the biggest fire. Now that's not the case. But anyway, this they had a lot of evacuations, and I had been going there for about a week, and all the stories were kind of looking the same. And so we were, as media, you can go into these evacuation sites with your credentials, with your media pass, and you're able to report on the damage, on you know, how the fire is moving closer to the homes, all that stuff. So there was a guy who really wanted to get through, and because he wanted to see if his home was still standing. And he begged my photographer now. He's like, can I please come with you to check? And I was like, I asked the cops, like, you know, it's up to you. We're not going to say no. It's your call. So I was like, okay. So we let him come with us. And the story was, you know, what this man felt before, just the uncertainty he was facing, not knowing if his home was still standing. So it's kind of a unique perspective. You'll see, we allow him to get in the car with us, and I won't spoil too much, but that was a way of, instead of just standing by a fire saying, yeah, you know, this fire is ripping through these homes, it just showed someone who had been evacuated for over a week and was just living with this uncertainty of, you know, am I going to have something to come back to? So go ahead, Pete.
You guys seeing this?
Yes.
We're back in the Spring Valley community. Ricky is with us. He's lived here for the past 7 years. He had to evacuate on Friday, and he doesn't know if his home is still standing, so we're going to go check it out. Ricky Adams has spent 3 sleepless nights worried he might have lost his home in what's on track to become the largest wildfire in California's history.
At least law enforcement's here.
Does that make you feel better?
Somewhat.
Why?
A lot of looters.
As we approach his neighborhood,
And our house is still there.
you see it?
Yes.
A sigh of relief. How does it feel to have your home look just the way you left it?
It makes me feel a lot better. A lot better. It's going to make my girlfriend feel better. I don't know what to say. No, I just feel good. My home's still here.
On the other side of the mountain along Highway 20 in the town of Lucerne,
I have to stay here. And there's the lake right there.
Janice Smith refuses to leave the place she's called home for 4 decades.
No, if all else fails, I can swim.
Right on the ridge.
And down the road in Nice,
It's a definite back and forth as to whether, you know, I should stay or go.
this homeowner stayed to protect his house and animals since last Saturday while his family evacuated to Roseville.
I'm just really hoping that today this fire will pass.
In Lake County, Daniela Pardo, ABC 10 News.
Yeah, so thankfully his home was standing, and you just see how emotional he gets. And that was kind of a different story. Usually the style is more like you're standing in front of a house or in front of something and you're talking. This one, I was like, let's just kind of tell it as we go. So I was like, hey, you know, we're with Ricky. He doesn't know if his home is standing. I asked him a question, and I just kind of wanted, with that story, I wanted to take the audience to where I was and just kind of let it breathe instead of me talking so much. I just really wanted to let the people in that story talk and try to just convey those emotions that they were feeling, which it's a lot for all the evacuees here in Northern California that are just dealing with this every year.
Yeah, I was gonna say your script for that story might have been like 2 lines, right?
Very minimal, yeah.
But very very effective. Reminds me of your fire story, Jim.
So let me just tag on to the back end of this, Danielle. I thought it was fantastic because when I watch these fires, the complex fire and the Bobcat fire, they don't mean anything to me outside of just how many acres. I mean, who knows how many 15,000 acres is, you know? My lot size is 6,000 square feet. So I don't even know what that means. So they all become kind of white noise to me. But when you make it personal like that, I'm a homeowner. So when that guy's in the car, I'm in the back seat with him because I'm sitting there thinking, how would I react? How would I be that guy when he's down the hill and he can't even see? He doesn't even know what's happening. I mean, it changes your whole world. Where's he going to stay tonight? He has no more clothes. Everything's gone. If you had animals. And then when you can see when it finally strikes, he sees it from the car. My home's still there. But then when you're talking to him outside the gate, and that's where it all drops, the mask comes off and you can see he just gets choked up. And that's super powerful. So to the students, I would say the thing that she did that's awesome. And I learned this later in my career, but I always tell when I speak to groups, get out of the way of the story. And that's what Daniela did. She didn't make it about herself. It's all about that guy. It didn't need music. It doesn't need, any graphics. You're just watching this guy find out what's happening to his life, his history, his family home, just unfolds. It's just raw. And that's how I'm doing. She just asked the question, which is just the nudge to get him going, and then got out of the way. It's a simple story, and I thought it was powerful. It was great work.
Daniela, has it been, so the first couple of years and any prior, we should talk a little bit about your career journey, but your first couple of years, you did a lot of fire stories, right? A little crime, all the usual. Now you're the politics. Has that been a hard transition? Something obvious, I would guess you opted for?
You know what? No. If you would have asked me a year ago, do you see yourself as a political reporter? I wasn't even looking for these kind of jobs. I was kind of in my comfort zone. I got used to doing a little bit of everything every day. I enjoyed it, but then I also craved days like the ones I'm telling you, where I just have time to do research. In local news, there's just so much to cover. The Sacramento market has 16 counties. So it's overwhelming. And my now boss, I guess he found my bio on my former station's website, and it just, timing worked out. My contract was coming up. He needed someone the month that my contract was up. He reached out to me and I went for the interview. I had a really good feeling about it. And I mentioned, I was like, I've never covered politics. It's not something that was strong on my resume. I've covered some political stories, but it's never been my beat. It's never been my focus. I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not good at like one specific beat. So but I said, but I'm willing to learn. I'm going to work twice as hard as the other political reporters that, have been doing this for a long time, because I know I have a lot catching up to do. And so it worked out. I got hired at the end of October, and the legislative session at the Capitol didn't start until January. So I had about a month and a half, 2 months to invite political reporters out to coffee and pick their brain and ask them questions and say, hey, I'm starting from zero. How do I get to, not get to your level, because a lot of them have been doing this for 20 years, but what do I need to know going into this new job? Who should I meet up with? And one of the things, political reporters will never share sources with you. I'll never expect them to, but they did provide some guidance on how to build your own sources. And it's as simple as just taking someone out to coffee, showing up to different hearings, showing up to different networking events. And so with COVID, it's been difficult because there's not that opportunity to meet with people in person. And so it's been challenging with my first year covering politics, but I do my best. I did get to meet some people in those months where we still got to see each other in person and whatnot. But I really had to start from zero. Some of the skills that did translate was editing. I do edit my own stories. We have a production assistant who helps out sometimes, but a lot of the stuff is the same. I still do those people stories like I did at my old job, but now I just have a beat, but it still allows me to do human interest pieces, which is what I've been passionate about since I was in college. It's just on a different platform now.
Sure. In most news operations, covering whether it's local government or covering state government has been shriveling, right? It's not, the newsrooms are smaller. It's not the, they say it's a great time to be a politician because you're less covered. So, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't expect, you wouldn't have expected this is where you would be your next gig. So yeah, it's probably been a heck of a learn. And this, what a tough beat, right? I mean, it's just so, a lot of it is it's an insider's game, and it's intricate. I mean, to learn, just the whole process, it would be a lifetime of learning, right?
Yeah, I agree. I sometimes I get overwhelmed, like, God, I still have so much to learn. But then I also remind myself to look back and see, well, there's so much I know now that I didn't know a year ago. So I give myself some grace, one step at a time. And I read a lot. I read a lot of newsletters, and that's kind of how it was when I was in college. I would watch and still do watch all the different news stations, Fox. I would watch everything just because I wanted to learn so bad. And that's what I do now. I read all the different, or try to read as much as possible, different sources, different outlets, because, and I'm not trying to copy anyone, but there's things I can learn from all the different reporters that have been doing this beat for a long time. And I'm just finding my own style. And the thing that I think is different about me and political reporters that cover this for the LA Times or Politico is that the advantage of being able to tell these human interest stories, a lot of them have to just focus on the law and get into the nitty gritty and the nuts and bolts and the details. And I still cover that, but I always try to find someone that makes you care about whatever law we're talking about.
So I just got you guys should have probably, hopefully received yours, unless you could be voting from your home. Just got my sample ballot, and of course so much focus obviously is on the presidential race. But California, we have the initiative process. And you say you have, I think you said 3 this week. What are a couple of the big ones? And I guess they would be big, starting with how much money is being spent on these, or just why are they the big? Well, what are a couple of ones that everyone should be focused on?
I was answering AJ when you're playing that story, but I'll just, because he asked that in the chat. I think Proposition 22, which is the Uber Lyft driver one, that one's probably the biggest one. If you haven't, or if you're going to call an Uber or Lyft, you're going to see their commercial come up when you get your ride. They're all over the place. And so last year, the legislature, California, passed a law that required Uber and Lyft to classify their riders as employees, not independent contractors or gig workers. And so Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all those tech companies, they've invested more than $100 million. They're fighting this. They're pretty much saying that they want to be exempt from this law, that people who are working these jobs do it to earn extra money. They do it for the flexibility. And then those that are against it, those who want to keep things the way that it's written in the law right now, say, well, these people deserve overtime. They deserve health insurance. They deserve unemployment insurance, especially during a pandemic. We've seen how everyone's been affected, and they can't apply for unemployment insurance. They can't. So it's really divided. And even the Uber drivers themselves, some of them want to keep things the way they are, and others want to have those benefits and more security. So that's a really big one, and I'm really curious to see how that one's going to go, and that could affect all of us. Because
Daniela, where does the taxi commission come into this?
I don't know. They're
destroyed
probably
that industry. I mean,
right.
I didn't ride Uber the first couple of years because I thought it was unfair, and then I got an Uber and I said, this is way better, and I haven't been in a taxi since. And I travel 2 times a week all over the country, all over the world.
Wow.
I think it's a great idea, and I love the flexibility. I've actually, during this, because I'm not working, there's no games, I actually thought about doing it myself. Mm-hmm. So when I heard that the state was trying to make these guys employees, I said, well, if I'm Uber or Lyft, I can't operate under that business model. It doesn't work. I'll collapse. Plus, how would I manage that? It's got to be a couple of 100,000 people driving, right? So how would you even do the paperwork on all these people and keep it straight? And then they have to do all the background checks, and I don't know, it just seemed unfeasible to me. And I think the taxi industry to me just became dinosaurs. They just couldn't keep up. You know, when I got in a taxi at LAX, when I used to live in Santa Monica, I remember this. I would get in the taxi and the guy would say, where are we going? I'd say Santa Monica. And the guy would throw a hissy fit because it was 7 miles. He said, I just waited 3 hours to take you 7 miles.
Classic LAX.
What do you want to do? Take me to Burbank and then go to Santa Monica's? So that's where I live. You're next in line. You know, bummer for you, but the guy would give me a bunch of attitude all the way home.
That's an interesting angle to hear from them, see what they have to say about all this. It's a good point.
As a Postmates driver myself, I kind of, like, on one hand, I'm like, yeah, the benefits would be nice. And thankfully 22 is saying like, yes, we'll give you the benefits. But the other one that's in the fine print that I kind of didn't like is that in exchange for these benefits, our tax liabilities go up. So like,
right. And then it's probably going to increase the fares for the drivers, because if they have to be classified as employees, that's less people that are going to be riding Uber and Lyft. And that means we're going to have to pay more, and there's going to be less ride shares available. We'll see how that one goes. I think that's the biggest one right now.
It's a tricky one, and I'm currently waiting for it because I want to get back to Postmating, but I'm like, I can get back into Postmating, and then all of a sudden I'd be classified as employee, and everything gets a little hazy. So,
well, it points up. I mean, so in California, and it goes back to Proposition 13, 1972. Jim, you were here.
Jarvis? You going with Jarvis?
Exactly. And it kind of, not every state has the initiative process, but just from this discussion, this is complicated. Should we be deciding this? All of us, we're all busy. Some are really engaged citizens, but even if you are, Daniela covers it for Pete. Jim's a very engaged journalist, but should we be deciding this? Or isn't that what we're paying lawmakers to decide? But here in California, we've gotten used to, this is controversial. Well, they actually did pass, right? AB 5. This is really important. We'll let the citizens decide it. What could be more democratic? But is that the best way to go about it? Because it is so complicated. Yeah,
it really is. And there's just so many layers to it, but that's my SparkNotes version of it. And we'll just see where it goes.
So,
and then, go ahead.
Let's see. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning. So Daniela, take us on how you got to Sacramento. You left Chapman.
Yeah, I think going back to Chapman, I did a lot of internships. I transferred. I first went to OCC, Orange Coast College, right out of high school. I didn't know. Yeah. Did you go there too?
Sure. I went to every JC in Orange County, everyone.
Yeah. I went to Cypress High School, and then went to OCC. Yep. And then I was at Chapman for 2 years, and I did Chapman News with Pete. It was awesome. I did a lot of internships. I interned for NBCLA, Dateline, KTLA, this other Spanish network doing entertainment news, kind of random, a family friend. So my mom was actually, she went to school in Colombia. That's where she's from, Colombia, the country. And she wanted to be a journalist. So she had friends that were in the industry here in LA, and he worked for this station in Colombia, and he hated doing entertainment news. And that wasn't my thing either, but I was in college, and he was like, hey, Daniela, you want to go to this red carpet? Because he didn't want to do it. And I was like, yeah. And so that's kind of how I was like, you know what? I like this interviewing thing. I always liked journalism because my mom always talked to me about it, and she chose to be a wife and a mom, so she didn't go through with her career. But it was always, watching the news was just something I grew up with, and it's just something I never thought I could do. But at Chapman, there was just so many opportunities to network, people like Pete who helped me polish my resume and the emails I had to send out to make me stand out. I felt like I was really lucky to have people like Pete and other professors who instilled that confidence in me that I was still lacking in my early 20s. And I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be a reporter. I was like, God, I don't like the way, I'm more soft-spoken than I think a lot of reporters. So I was like, I don't sound like that. I don't look like that. But then I had a lot of great mentors that said, you know what, get rid of all that. If this is what you want to do, then you can do it. So those internships led to really great networking opportunities. And after Chapman, I didn't go to, so traditionally, if you are a reporter, broadcast reporter for news and sports too, you start off in a small market. That's the most traditional route, which means you go to a city. My first city was Grand Junction, Colorado, town of 70,000 people, where I was probably the only brown person. And I grew up in SoCal, so I was used to having friends from all over and different foods, and there's a lot to do in Southern California. So I go to this little town where, no offense, but it's all white people, and like the restaurants were like Chili's and that was it. Like if you wanted Chinese or whatever, there's none of that. And so Colorado is a beautiful state. I love the state of Colorado, but I'm not a small town girl. So it was hard. And then I was an MMJ, which means how familiar are you guys with the terms? So sometimes I feel like I don't want to get stuck in the jargon. If
Multimedia journalist, you guys did.
Yeah. So it was cool. So yeah, I was editing, writing, shooting my own stories. Awesome. And it was a lot because in the small market, I was working for a duopoly, so an NBC and an ABC affiliate. I had to shoot 2 different stories every day and turn each of those stories into like 2 different versions. So it was just a lot of work. You got paid for 8 hours, but I was working like 11 or 12 every day. Lunch was non-existent.
You're under contract there too?
I wasn't. I was lucky. I wasn't under contract. So I was there for like 5 months, and I had a friend who I had interned with back in LA, and she was in El Paso, Texas. And she was like, hey, our station's looking for a reporter. And for El Paso, you need you're like, I don't know, probably 1 or 2 years experience. And I was like, I've only been doing this for 4 months. She's like, just apply, send me a reel and apply. I was like, well, I'm not under contract, so I have nothing to lose. Well, I got the job in El Paso. So I left Colorado after like 5 months. I was in El Paso for 2 years, worked the morning show. So I had the 3 a.m. to noon shift. Woke up at 1:30 if I had to wash my hair, or 2 a.m. Got ready for work. And like Pete mentioned earlier, I was live about 4 or 5 times. And then what was cool about being there during that time is that's when, there's always a lot of immigration stories that are happening there, but that's around the time that President Trump was running. So there was a lot of things that were up in the air and a lot of activism.
Giant army base too, right? One of the biggest in the...
Yeah, Fort Bliss, so army base. And El Paso is a unique market because you cover a little bit of New Mexico, you cover El Paso, and then it borders with Juarez, Mexico. So the Pope visited Juarez while I was reporting there. And I'm bilingual, so I asked if I could go to Mexico and cover his visit. And my boss said, sure. I mean, if you want to, like, because it was in the 2010, Juarez was like the murder capital of the world, and it was really dangerous. By the time I was there, things had improved, but there was still a risk. But I don't know. I wanted to be there. I'm like, how am I not going to be there when he's going across the border? And so typically when a pope visits any city, they're given about a 6 months heads up. Well, in Juarez, they got 2 months. So these people had to turn the city around, make sure that they were just prepared to receive him. And I remember the first day that I went to Mexico, it was just like, you just crossed the bridge and you were there in like 5 minutes from El Paso. I didn't have any sources. I didn't know anyone, but I just went to City Hall. I went to the reception. I was like, hi, so naive. I'm a reporter from El Paso, blah, and I'm doing a story on the Pope's visit, and I'd like to talk to the mayor. And they're like, oh, okay, do you have an appointment? I was like, no, but I want to get one, and that's why I'm here, blah, blah. She's like, okay, well, let me see if he's here. He was there. They let me go upstairs and set something up with his secretary, and I was like, wow, that was lucky. And then I got an interview, the first station in El Paso to get an interview.
You must have been impressed with the Chapman degree, Daniela.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, she's a Panther. Let's grant her access. So that was a really cool opportunity because I was going to Juarez every day for like 2 months. It got me away from doing the stuff that I was doing every day. And it was just a really unique opportunity because on his actual visit, all the stations were there from all over the world and all over the country. And it just felt so cool to be there and provide more depth in my reporting, because I wasn't just there for a day. I'd been there for 2 months, and I knew all the things that that city did to prepare. So it was just awesome to cover such a national story.
Would you say that was one of the stories, or maybe the story, if such a thing happens, where you felt like went there, didn't know anyone, it's a papal visit where you're like, and maybe you don't even realize it why it's happening, like, hey, I can do this, or I'm getting there.
I think so, especially seeing a lot of I grew up watching a lot of Spanish news. So watching the network anchors, like literally just 2 feet away from me or 3 feet away from me, reporting on the same story. I was like, wow, like I was a little kid when I grew up watching these people, and now I'm reporting on the same story as them. It was great. And it was just such a proud moment. I'm not even Catholic, but for my family, it was just such a proud moment, because just in the Latin culture, that's such a big deal. And even if you're not religious, just the story itself was a big moment. As a journalist, I would definitely say that was one of the moments where I was like, wow, I'm so lucky to provide a glimpse of what's happening here to people at home who are so excited to see this.
Daniela mentioned her stories this week, so setting this up, gonna let her go. I mean, I don't want to think I'm sliding Jim here, but we'll get plenty of the Jim Watson story as we go along. So Daniela, so you're spent a few years in El Paso. At no point, first of all, on the move from Grand Junction, did you think I made the wrong move? It was even with that shift, it was like this was right. This is what I needed for my progression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think every market, every shift taught me something different. In Grand Junction, it taught me to be quick. I became a really quick writer because I had no option. I had to make my deadline, and I had like 500 stories to write. And you either do it or you don't. And I did it. And it was hard, and it was really difficult because I'd never been away from my family. Even when I went to Chapman, I lived so close, and we didn't have a lot of money to spend, so I lived at home.
At the USA Columbia game, if I remember.
Yeah. So my parents said, because I got paid as, I don't know, you got paid nothing. So I was lucky to have my parents' support. It was $9 an hour for my first job. And my friends at In-N-Out were making more than me. So that was hard. It's kind of demoralizing. You went to college, you got your degree, and you're getting paid less than someone who didn't go to college. But I wouldn't trade, or I wouldn't change anything about my experience, because I was like, if I'm doing this for $9 an hour, living, far away from my family, missing out on birthdays, missing out on anniversaries, holidays, I must really like this if I think it's worth it. And then when I moved to El Paso, it was a little bit better because I made friends, and I just felt like I fit in more within that culture. And I was able to just use my skills as a bilingual reporter to connect with more people, and I just enjoyed that. And then in Sacramento, same thing. I learned different skills, but everything has gotten me to where I am today. And I think it's good to have a plan, but you don't want to be married to that plan. I think you have to be open-minded. You have to be flexible. I would have never thought I'd have this opportunity, this job, and I never thought I would enjoy it as much as I did, but I was open to learning something new. And
were you open to, and Jim, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. Daniela, you've been out now for about 7 years. Jim, more than 7 years, about 25. Were you open to, Daniela, you first, both of you, were you open to leaving this? Like, and maybe there were even points after a rough day or rough patch, like, because more people get out of it than stay in.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so many days where you had a bad live shot, made a fool out of yourself, or just it's a tough industry. In the smaller markets, you don't get a lot of feedback. They always point out what you do wrong, but it's rare when you hear what good of a job you do. So there were so many times where I'm like, I don't know if this is even
reward.
Yeah, this is worth it. But
small markets.
but yeah, I definitely considered, well, but then I'm like, I don't see myself doing anything else. I really I said, I'm going to do 3 markets. And if, then I'll make my decision. So I did do 3 markets, and I don't plan on leaving the industry. I want to be in it as long as I can. And I think it's paid off to go through those small markets for little money, being away from family. Now I have a job that I'm happy, and it's just really, I have like a work life, a personal life and work life balance that I think took a long time to achieve, but I feel like I made it in that sense. So
we'll get to that, because I know you're dying to share with everyone your personal life. But and best of all, your family can watch you on TV now.
Yep, very happy about that.
Which they do these days. Everyone can. Jim, I can't recall. We fairly stayed in touch for 25 plus years. Were you ever close to leaving the industry?
Sure, I did leave the industry. Well, it left me.
We've all
Yeah. So my first TV gig was actually when I was a senior at SC. I got an internship, and it was great. When I was at SC, I was in a specialized program for sports. It treated sports as its own industry. So broadcasting, marketing, PR, they were way ahead. They recognized, I think Notre Dame and Northwestern were the only other schools doing it at the time. So they were training us specifically for that industry. And of course, the journalism school at SC hated us because we didn't consider ourselves journalists. We wanted to be sportscasters. And I remember when I was a senior, all the kids in my class, and because I spent an inordinate amount of time in junior college, I was older than almost everybody I went to school with. And so they all wanted internships with the Lakers and the Dodgers because they want to tell their friends. They get to walk in the clubhouse and see some famous person. But at that point, I was looking for a job. I was bartending at night, and I was living in Newport Beach and with 3 other guys. And I just, I needed to grow up and move on with my life. So I asked for an internship where I would get practical experience. And they said, well, the only one we have like that is at a cable system in Southgate. And Southgate is in South Central Los Angeles near Downey and Compton. And there's a cable system there, and they cover the city council meetings, and they cover the high school football team and, parades and things like that. And I said, well, do I get to touch equipment? And they said, yeah, go talk to the guy. So I went down and talked to this guy named Ned Augustenborg. And so I walk into Southgate. Southgate is 95% Hispanic. I walk in, and this guy is 6'6", blonde hair, blue eyes, freckles. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I want to work in this business. I want to work and put my hands on machines. And he said, you come back next week, you're a cameraman on the city council meeting. So I came back, and I was a cameraman on the city council meeting. And then he said, can you come back tomorrow night? We're doing the high school football talk show, and I need a cameraman. I said, sure. So I came back the next night. I'm a cameraman. There's a guy named Kevin Rolfe who's hosting the show with the high school football coach. They do 30 minutes, showing highlights, just the usual stuff. And it ends, and afterwards, Kevin Rolfe goes into the hallway with our boss, Ned Augustenborg, and they're having a chat. We're all breaking down cameras, and I'm learning cable over and under, and I'm learning how to wrap cable. And all of a sudden, this discussion in the hallway between our boss and the host gets a little heated, and then you hear the host say, well, my dad says you should be paying me for this. And Ned, our boss, says, paying you for this? I'm putting you on TV, and you have very little ability. And he says, well, if you're not going to pay me, I quit. And Ned says, I don't care if you quit. I can get any monkey to do this job. And that's when I stuck my head in the hallway, and he said, you come tomorrow with a coat, you're my new host. Rolf, you're gone. And that's how I got my first on-air job, just like that, because it wasn't paid. And I came back. I had a tweed sports coat with the patches. I had a really bad wide tie that I wasn't good at tying. I had a terrible cop mustache. And I had a notepad about this thick with everything I was going to say into the camera. So I was just doing this the whole time. And when I finished, he said, okay, you got the gig. Come back next week, and you'll do the show from now on for the rest of the week. So I did that for 2 years. The second year, they started paying me. I was calling the high school football games as well. The high school football team had never been any good. When I got there, they won 23 games in a row, won the city championship, had the longest winning streak west of the Mississippi. So one night I stayed after. I put together a bunch of stories and highlights on this team, and I sent it to a show called Scholastic Sports America at ESPN, thinking nobody will ever look at this. I got a call a couple of days later. They said, we want to use it, but we would love to take your voice off of it. And I said, okay. They said, you're the producer. We'll give you a producer credit and we'll pay you. Of course, I had to check with the cable system and all that. We did that. So then they said, you know, your work's not bad. Do you want to be a West Coast producer for us? And I said, well, can I do stand-ups? And they said, you can include a stand-up and a package in every story, but we're not going to use it. But let's see what you can do. So I did that for a year. At the end of the year, they used 2 of my stories and we won an ACE award. So I got to fly to Atlanta, go to the ACE Awards with all the ESPN, bigwigs and all the on-air talent. It was a lot of fun. It was great. And at the end of it, I thought, here we go.
You're still a college kid at that point.
I graduated by then. I was probably 9 months out of college. So, yeah. So then I come back and I'm thinking, well, now I got the world on a string. I won an ACE Award. Do they even have those anymore, Pete? Do the ACE Awards still exist? Award for Cable Excellence. Yeah, I don't think so. Anyway, so I thought, now I can write.
They still had the Emmys last week.
And I came back and my station didn't give me a raise. They didn't do anything. And I said, well, what am I doing here? So I went back to bartending. They said, we're not going to give you any more money. We're not going to give you anything. So you can just keep doing this gig. I kind of painted myself into a corner, kind of demanding it. And then I ended up having to walk. They said, we're not giving you anything. We're planning on moving on from you. It doesn't look like you want to be here anymore. So you have to be careful what you demand. Demands and requests are very tricky business. So I went back to bartending. And then through bartending, I got a job on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. I worked on that. Through that, I got a job in ad sales at NBC. I was selling commercial time. And that was when Seinfeld was huge. So I'm trying to sell ads for the '88 Seoul Olympics. Nobody wanted that. They all wanted Seinfeld. So we say, if you want a Seinfeld ad, you got to buy X amount of ads on the Seoul Olympic Games. So I was learning that industry. The vice president of that ad industry or ad department at NBC went and started a new network called E Entertainment Television. So I went with her. I worked there for about a year and disliked it greatly. I grew up in Southern California. I have no interest in the entertainment industry. I don't want to interview Tom Cruise. I don't care. I'm not that interested in it. But through that, I met a guy there who's a salesperson, and his girlfriend was an anchor at a place called the Orange County News Channel. Her name was Brooke Robbins. And he said, I can get you an interview. I went down to Orange County News Channel. This is where I met Pete. He was the business reporter. I came in and I said, I want to do this for a living. I want to be a sportscaster. And they said, great, you're an intern. So I sold commercial time in the daytime at E, and then at night I would drive down. So I'd start about 7 o'clock in the morning in Wilshire, across from the La Brea Tar Pits, if you know where that is. So I would be there at 7 a.m. I lived in Newport Beach, so I'm leaving at 5 to beat traffic. I'd work 7 to about 6 o'clock at night. Then I'd drive down and work on a talk show that the sports department had called Sports Talk on OCN, where I'd answer phones and maybe run out and shoot a game with a little handy cam and do all these things. And then on the weekend, I would come in and work for free as a reporter. I'd go out with a little handy cam with a button mic on it, go out and do just terrible stories and try to get the anchor to use my stuff. He would use my highlights, which look like the Zapruder film. Does that joke still play, Pete? People know Zapruder?
I don't know if they know Johnny Carson.
I'm seeing blank stares.
Who knows? All right, here we go. For 1 point, hold on 1 second, Jim, and you'll like this. So for 1 point on the next quiz, which you'll receive tomorrow, the next quiz with tomorrow's will be on this week and last week's guest. In the chat room, who is Zapruder? Daniela, the political reporter, you definitely cannot play.
Can we tell him his first name?
George.
Abraham,
you're right. And fairly recently passed away, I think.
Very good. Yeah.
Who is Zapruder? Let's go. In the chat room. Going once. Anybody?
I'm going to have to update my jokes.
All right, you can share it with everyone.
Anyway, the point of all this is I'm showing Daniela's route was more traditional and more direct. In fact, with most of the people I know in this business, hers was a meteoric rise. You went to 3 markets, counting Sacramento. So you're Grand Junction, El Paso, and then you're in Sacramento, the capital of California.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. And how long a time are we talking? What's the timeline?
Started in 2015 with the first reporting job. So about 5-6 years. Yeah. Going on
That's
6
great.
years.
And for those of you not reading between the lines, I mean, she's talented, because that's how you make it in our business. You work hard, talented.
There's a sufficient amount of hardship. The
You're-
130, the
Well, it's
130
great.
shift.
It's great because you can see she's already got some character, and she's learned how hard it is to make it in this business, appreciating what she has. And I always tell people when I speak to colleges, or I'm talking to kids on the street or on an airplane when they're bothering me, and they say, I want to do this for a living. And I say, well, all right, where do you want to start? And they say, ESPN. I want to host SportsCenter. And I say, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, I do. And I say, no, you don't, because you're not going to get it, for one. And for two, if you happen to trip your way into something like that, you won't be prepared. And when something goes wrong, you'll end up on YouTube and out of a job. And it's happened many times. I'm not going to use a name, but I used to anchor with a woman in Los Angeles. And she got her job because she was a Raiderette. She was a Raider cheerleader. And somebody thought she was beautiful and charismatic, and they said she could be a sportscaster. And she could. You just basically know the sport a little bit, write some highlights, and she was fine. And we sat on the set, and we're reading teleprompter, everything was fine. Well, within just a few years, she ended up as the sideline reporter on Monday Night Football. And after a game,
Lisa Guerrero.
player came out, and she didn't know which team he was with because he wasn't wearing his jersey anymore. And she interviewed him thinking he was a different player. And listen, I'm telling you, I've done hockey interviews, and the guys come out of the locker room and they have their jersey off because they're so hot. So they're just wearing their pads and their skating shorts and their skates. They come out of the locker room, and the PR knucklehead comes up to you and goes, yeah, here's Sparky. And I look at my roster, and there's nobody named Sparky, so I don't know who he is. So now I have to ask in 20 seconds, I'm going to have him live for 7 minutes, and I got to ask him questions, and I don't even know who he is. I don't know what position he plays. So I'll be tapping my ear, asking if anybody in the truck knows, and trying to help you out any way you can. But yeah, it's I always tell people, you don't want to start in a big market. You want to start in a small market. You can make
your mistakes when no one can see them.
And no one cares, and they're more forgiving at a station like that. And the other part of that is you can practice styles. You can change the way you do things. You're not locked in. Don't ever do a voice. I don't like the voice. I don't know why people do a fake voice on TV. That's a radio thing. I worked with a guy in Seattle, a guy named Cameron Wong, and he's a good sportscaster. And I'd known him for a couple of weeks before we anchored together, and we come on the air, and I say, hey, welcome to the Northwest Sports Report. I'm Jim Watson, alongside Cameron Wong. And he goes right into the Mariners. I have reported the great thing about the Mariners. And I start laughing, and he looks at me, and I go, you're not going to do that voice the whole show, are you? And my producer goes, that's what he does on air. That's what he does on air. And he's still a friend of mine to this day, but I didn't know he did a voice. I mean, It didn't work. It's a radio voice.
I can't echo that enough. Don't do the voice. I definitely tried to do the voice in college because you grow up watching people and they sound like this, and 3 people passed away last night. So I thought that's what I had to sound like until I was told that you just have to be authentic, be yourself. And like I said, I'm pretty soft-spoken, which doesn't mean I have to sound like this. You just learn how to project, and you learn how to kind of raise your voice, but it's still your voice. So I cannot echo that enough. That's so funny that you said that.
And for people who haven't been on TV yet, or for Hillary Clinton, you don't have to scream into a microphone. They can turn the volume up just talking to the microphone.
Or Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Yeah, there you go. You can raise your voice, for inflection, or for, to let people know that this is an important part, but just if you keep screaming, they'll keep turning you down. When I work with new analysts, we wear headphones. So when I work with a new analyst who's never been on TV before, and they're a little nervous, and so they're going to be soft-spoken, and it's really strange when you hear your own voice in your head so clearly. And, now with earbuds, you kind of get what I'm talking about. But when you're wearing cups over your, it's really quiet, and all you hear is your voice. You can hear your breathing. And so most people they retreat from that, and they shrink, and you'll see them sitting in their chair like this. They're almost whispering into their microphone. So the first trick that I do, and I don't even tell them I do it, I turn their return, what they hear in their ear, I turn it way down so they can barely hear themselves, and they'll automatically start to project and talk louder, and then it comes across better. Because when you're in a stadium of 60,000 people doing a college football game, and you're excited and you're projecting and you're at about a 7, and this guy's at a 3. One, the audio guy's going crazy trying to write levels, but it just doesn't match. So then it's inauthentic. Somebody's excited and somebody's not, and the viewer's confused. Who am I taking my cue from? So I do that little trick, and it seems to work. So a lot of times I have to work with people, former athletes and that kind of thing, never been on air, and they show up with no preparation, and they just think, well, let me tell you the James Worthy story while we're here. So I'm doing a Pepperdine basketball game for Fox in Los Angeles, and they tell me you're going to work with big game James Worthy. So here's how it works in sports. You show up 2 hours before the game, and normally the day before you either call the coaches or go to practice so you can do your homework. So I go to practice the day before. I send James Worthy some emails, no answer. I call his agent, no return. Nobody has time for me. So I go to the game the next day. I'm at Firestone Fieldhouse in Malibu 2 hours before we're on air. I meet with my producer, my director. Everything's good. I talk to the visiting coach, from Gonzaga, and comes down, and get all our notes, and everybody's looking around, and they said, I thought you're working with Worthy. I am. Oh, I wanted to meet James Worthy. Where is he? I don't know. I've never met him. He's coming in, he should be here. Should have been here half hour. Now it's 15 minutes before the game. So we're on camera taping our open. You tape the open down on the floor. Usually you do it live, but in this case, we're taping it because he's new, and then you run up to your broadcast position. A lot of times it's courtside, but at Firestone, you're up higher near the rafters. So we're going to tape it, and since he was new, we're going to give him a couple takes at it, but he's not there. So they tell me with about 13 minutes to air, you're going solo. So great. So now I'm going to do an open by myself for 5 minutes, but as you can tell, I have no problem filling time. So I nail it, because in our business, you always want to be a one-take person. It feels live, and the crew loves you. And my last name is Watson. Everybody calls me Waddy. So they tease me and call me One Take Waddy. And usually they say that before I do the take to tell me you're only going to get one of these. Right? So, and by the way, when you nail the one take, this is what you say to the crew. They only pay us for one. And then you drop the mic and walk away. So Worthy walks in. Worthy's never met me. Worthy walks up. My stage manager takes off, his bag and his car keys and his phone, and he says, okay, we're going to do the open. And he has no idea what we're doing. And so they put him in front. I said, I'll walk you through it. Just follow me. And he looks at me and he goes, who's playing? I said, well, you're standing at Pepperdine, so you knew they were playing, right? He said, I've never been here before. So he didn't know either of the teams who were playing. So I had to give him my notes. So I milked him through the open. We had to do it about 4 times. Then I went up and sat next to him to actually call the game. Okay, this is the easy part. He knows basketball. I bring out my notes. I do mine on a computer, color-coded. I do them numerically by player. I have italics and underlines. I have OCD, so all of this falls into place for me. I love it. He has a briefcase. He brings his briefcase up, click, click, opens it up, takes out a blank legal pad and a pen, puts the briefcase down, takes my notes, and starts to copy them. It would take him like 3 days to write down everything I wrote. So I said, listen, I'll just put them in the middle. And we called the whole game, and it was basically a 2-hour interview. He wouldn't talk unless I asked him a question. Last 30 seconds of the game, Pepperdine hits a shot to go up by 6 points. Game's out of reach. It's all over. They run out the clock. And I'm wrapping it up and saying, hey, Pepperdine will be back in action on Thursday night on our air at 7:30. They're playing USD. The Triton's coming up, Brad Holland, the head coach. And I look over, and James Worthy has put his empty notepad back in his briefcase, shut it, taken off his headset, and is walking down the stairs and gives me one of these and walked away while we were still on the air. So I'm still calling games at that level, and James Worthy's on national TV. And that's our business.
I would say in his particular case, sometimes even with athletes, you think and even with stars on shows, you think you're getting away with it, and it comes a day when you don't. But in his case, he has.
Yeah. Well, he learned to do it. People got to him and trained him.
Okay.
And He learned it the hard way. But, you know, in his defense, it was my boss's fault. They hired him and didn't make him come watch a game, come into the studio. Nobody went out to his house, you know, PA. I would have gone out there and sat down and just gone over some stuff with him. So they kind of set him up for failure. But a lot of guys show up and just think, I just got to show up and be James Worthy, and that's enough. And it's not. It's not, because as Pete said, you get revealed pretty quick. You know, 2 hours of ad-libbing is hard to hide. You're gonna say or do something, and people are gonna know what's going on.
And again, not to beat a dead horse, but in today's environment, awful announcing, all the watchdogs out there, you're exposed as the game is going on, and you're unprepared. It blows up on social media. Hey, Danielle, I wanna maybe watch one more story with you, and could we watch? You read the story about the murder in the Sikh community, which at that time was unsolved. Do you recall that? Maybe that sound like a good one to watch?
Yeah, sure. That one, also about a year ago when I was at the local ABC station, hate crimes were up at the time, and someone killed a man who attacked this man who was a member of the Sikh community. He was just walking around the park. I think it was like a Sunday night. And so everyone came together, and you guys will see they held a vigil for him.
I'm sorry.
How did it come out of the wall? Did you grab it?
No.
And this is more an example of a day turn with the fire story, where you get your assignment that morning or that evening, you go out.
Pay the respects to Mr. Singh, and to let the family know that they're not alone.
We want them to know that the love of this community surrounds.
It's not coming up, Pete.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You guys see it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Happy man. Very, very happy man.
Harmjeet Singh's son-in-law wasn't the only one to describe the 64-year-old as a loving person.
He was a member of our community, and my daughter and I used to walk out here when he was walking, and he would always say hi to her, and just a ray of sunshine, very nice gentleman. Never bothered anyone, very peaceful man. You know, so I had to convey our respects.
And I'm very thankful for all of the sympathy and my neighborhood.
Most of the people at the vigil didn't know Singh personally, but said they were devastated by this senseless tragedy and wanted to show support to the Sikh community.
We don't want to single out the fact that Mr. Singh was a member of a specific community. Mr. Singh was a member of Tracy's community. And we're all looking for answers. This is something that affects all of us equally.
While many friends and family are calling the incident a hate crime, police say they still don't have any information on the suspect's motive.
We need to take strong action about this. And I hope city of Tracy will capture that monster as soon as possible, you know, and punish him.
The mayor of Tracy called the person who did this a coward and said he and the Tracy Police Department will do everything they can until that suspect is caught.
Yes.
It was an emotional night here at Gretchen Alley Park, where hundreds of people showed up to pay their respects to Miss.
Sorry about that. Danielle, was there any, it's not fair to ask this in the news business, was there ever any follow-up on any, they ever...
They did catch the guy, and I believe they did. If, like I said, there was a lot of hate crimes around that time, but I believe for this one they did. And yeah, I think with that kind of story, you hear a lot of tragic things happening on the news. And for one of the things that, like, I've always told myself and I remind myself is, even though you're out there reporting a sad story, you're still a human, and it's okay. You have to learn how to change your tone. So with that one, it was devastating. It was this grandfather who was just out walking like he did every day, and someone decided he didn't like his religion, didn't decide what he looked like. So you you show that you're not going to cry on air. And if you do, that's all right. But you keep it professional, but you show that this community is sad, they're mourning, and then you get out of the way and tell the story. So I think in the beginning, when I first started reporting, I was a little bit afraid of showing emotion because, you don't want to be biased, you want to be fair, but stories like this, we can all agree it's sad, and it's okay to show that and to say that.
And Daniela, when I started, I actually had to start in news. In fact, the first news director said, you want to be a sportscaster? Great, go work in the newsroom. So
Right.
The reason he did that is so I would have to go on stories like the one you just showed. And I found it, and it's probably still the most difficult thing I've ever had to do in my career. When someone loses a big game, they're coming back tomorrow. But I've had to go up to a mother who just found out that she lost a son. And I always felt a bit like a jackal or a vulture coming into this the worst time of their lives, and you're trying to get a soundbite from them. How do you approach that? And do you find that for some of these people, it's almost cathartic that they get to talk about it and just let some emotion out? How do you handle it?
Absolutely. That's a great point, because I always feel like an asshole too. I'm like, if someone in my family died, the last thing I want to do is give an interview. So I always just try to think, if this person just lost their kid, if they are rude to me and say, no, I don't want to talk to you, don't take anything personal. Just try to put yourself in their shoes and handle the interview, the situation with how you would want to be treated if you were going through that. And it's hard. And I'm always surprised when people do want to talk, even though that's my job and it's what I'm expected to do to get them to do the interview. I'm still surprised because, like I said, I wouldn't do it personally, but then it's also surprising how many people do want to share what this grandfather was like, what this man meant for their small community. So it's always humbling when someone does give you the time. And the way I handle it is, when you do a lot of interviews where people just ramble and talk, and you kind of cut them off because you're on a deadline. With these, I let them talk. If they want to talk for 8 minutes or 13 about their father-in-law who just died, I let them. I'm not going to be a jerk and cut them off. There's a time and a place to do that. So I let them tell me, whatever story they want to share, even if I'm only going to use 20 seconds of that. It's still just, I don't know, I just always treat people with the respect that I would want my family to receive.
Not much of a problem, I suppose, in covering politics, right? Just
oh no, they don't talk it off. They don't get the same treatment.
So before, like I said, but before we let you go, maybe even a little. So covering Sacramento is a little unique in it. Essentially, you're covering one party these days. What is, maybe even a little tutorial explanation. So the Democrats have a super majority. How is that different, maybe, in covering Sacramento from covering other places? And do you cover the governor? Also, do you cover the governor a lot?
Yeah, before he had his online press conferences, I would go to all his press conferences. And not because I was going to do a story on each one, but same thing. I wanted a network. I wanted his people to know me. So yeah, I used to go to all of them. Now they're all online, just like everything else nowadays. So it's tough to kind of be in the front and to let them know who you are. Because I don't know, I think you were sharing, Pete or Jim, maybe, how it was you when you were talking about Tiger Woods. Oh, that was so sweet. Some politicians, they have their favorites. So with me, I feel like I'm still a nobody, people still don't really know who I am. But anyway, kind of going back to how California government is, like I said, the legislature is divided by the Assembly and the Senate. They both have a supermajority, which means more than 70% of the Assembly and the Senate are Democrats. And Democrats in Orange County and Inland Empire, and even in some of the towns here in Northern California, they're different, but their vote is still pretty predictable. So they do disagree on certain things like housing and homelessness and how to fix those issues. But then for Republicans, it's a little bit tougher to get laws passed right now because we have a Democratic governor, Democratic legislature. So it is kind of interesting to cover California because it's just so different than the rest of the country. that supermajority.
Sure. Does it make it less, well, it's obviously, so it's less contentious. So maybe it's from a news standpoint, sometimes perhaps not as there's nothing like a good fight and there's less fighting.
Oh, there's still fights. On the last day of the session, which was like 3 weeks ago, they had until midnight to pass bills. And one member of there's not that many Republicans, but one member of the Republicans from the Senate side, from the caucus, got COVID. And they all went out to lunch, and they reportedly didn't wear masks. So they made all the Republicans quarantine, which meant that they couldn't be allowed, they weren't allowed at the Capitol for that time. And it was the last day to pass bills. So they all had to vote remotely. And that was a lot of drama because the Republicans said, if this had happened to Democrats, you wouldn't have quarantined the caucus, which is like hundreds of Democrats. And so what the Republicans did during the last day of session is they kind of ate a lot of time and didn't get a lot of these bills passed. So they kind of did get back at the Democrats. So there's always drama, even with
that points up where you like you were saying, like you're amazed how much you've learned in a year. That's when you really have to know. It sounds simple to say Robert's Rules of Order, but you really, and you can't just create experience, but you have to know parliamentary procedure, right? And how these things.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that I don't know, and so I'll email or text one of the people who I've met up with for coffee and say, hey, what does this mean? Why are they voting on this right now when they already voted on that an hour ago? And so I'm not afraid to ask questions. Like I said, I have a lot to learn, but I've also come a long way. So happy with where I am and excited to take what I've learned and keep growing.
So since we alluded to it, and it's of course it's a legitimate concern of anybody who's getting into business, especially if they're thinking they're willing to go to another place, of maybe a far-flung place for their first job or a second job. You've been able to have some semblance of a life beyond your career.
Yeah, things are finally starting to come together in my personal life. I turn 30 next year, and so that's exciting. I feel like when I was in college, I was like, oh, I'll be married by 25 and this and that. And being a Hispanic girl, my mom wanted me to be married and with kids by that age, so I always thought I would. And then now, as soon as I started dating someone, she's like, okay, so when are the grandkids happening? But I've always put my career first, always will. And but I am in a serious relationship now. We're looking to get engaged this year and hopefully married next year. So it's exciting that what I finally feel like I'm making it in my career and also in my personal life. And I used to, when I started, I was working weekends or I was working early mornings, and I just didn't make a lot of time for my personal life. So it's nice now to have that balance, to feel like it's not just my career. It's important to start thinking about a family, to start thinking about a home. So, but all that stuff came later. I feel like my early 20s was just paying my dues. Like you mentioned, Jim, even though I mentioned like the highlights of my career, there were a lot of internships and small jobs that I did for no money, just for the sake of gaining experience. And I was just so hungry that I knew it would pay off one day. So now that I'm like in my late 20s and turning 30 next year, I think like it all paid off. And sure, there's a lot of friends my age who are on their second baby, but I don't feel like I'm behind, because I feel like there's so much I got to do with my career that I wouldn't have been able to do perhaps if I was married younger or had kids younger. And it's just more acceptable now for women to get married or have kids a little later. So I don't feel like I've fallen behind because I'm 30 or I'm turning 30 and I'm not where I thought I would be when I was in college. That's okay, because there's other stuff that I feel I had to do to get to this point. So personal life, I get to see my family more because with Spectrum, we're based in LA. So when I started, I was going there maybe every month or so. They would fly me out. So it was nice because it was a work trip, but since I live, my family's in SoCal, I got to save some money and stay with them and not have the company pay for a hotel, and my parents get to see me now on their TV. So it's starting to come full circle, and it'll come full circle when I move to LA one day. But for now, Northern California is home. Never thought I would live in Sacramento, but going back to being open-minded, if I hadn't moved here, I wouldn't have this job. I wouldn't be dating the person who I'm going to marry. So you just have to be flexible, open, and work hard. It pays off.
Well, you certainly done that. You did it all through Chapman.
Yeah.
And 1:30 shift, all of that. I couldn't be happier for you, and thank you very much. You guys have parting questions for Daniela? And we'll let you get to those initiative stories, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course. I'll be here. I want to see what else Jim has to say.
Well, Jim, why don't you pick up where Daniela left? I mean, it's not something that's restricted to women in the profession. Do you feel like you had? I mean, I think it's an old adage, right? You have to be starting out. You've got to be selfish if you want to make it in a. I'd say especially on air. So many people want it. So few get it. It's got to be, your career has to come first, right?
Well, you just saw what Danielle said, 5 years from Grand Junction to El Paso to Sacramento. So who's going to follow you on that path and try to have their own life too, unless you're already married? So it's going to happen. And I was the same way when I started out. I was telling my girlfriend at the time, and she was thinking someday we'd get married. I said, well, I'm going to Scottsbluff, Nebraska to do sports, for $6.50 an hour. You don't want to come there, do you? And she worked for a big hotel chain. Now she's a vice president of Hilton. Maybe I should have rethought that one. But she said, no, I can't go. I have to stay here. And I said, well, then, that decides it for you right there. Because I'm going to be gone. And it's not like I go for 5 months and then I can bounce back to LA because, LA's market size 2. Scottsbluff, Nebraska, 239. There's a couple of markets in between those. And you have to climb the ladder all the way through it. So you have to be willing to do that. And as Daniela said, you miss birthdays and you miss births and, holidays and your family doesn't get it. They're like, well, just tell them we always get together for Thanksgiving. Like, that's not our business. I can't tell you how many Christmases I worked in a row, how many times I didn't see, a niece or a nephew for the first couple of weeks of their life until I could get time and come home. But that's, a lot of industries are like that. And the sacrifices there. And Daniela was talking about. Danielle,
but now look, 25 years down the road, your daughter.
Yeah, this is when no longer will your work be priority in your house. Yeah, it gets kicked down the list a little bit. Despite
the fact that she's so adorable and you're not, you're average. She's got the ham in her, so she's your daughter.
Yes, she is. Yeah. So, but my wife is in finance. And so my wife had to make a decision too. And I've seen now, and I've talked to a lot of women, not just in our industry, but all over the place, that had to make that decision when they came to that fork in the road that men rarely have to face, career or family. And my wife chose career. And so we didn't even get married until I was in my 40s. We got married. My wife is in her mid 30s. And she had gotten high enough in her business where now it was okay. It wouldn't affect her standing. But even now, after all this time has passed and, women are treated as equals and all that, you still see that there's a different treatment, and it depends the company you work for and your boss and who he's married to and all kinds of things. And watching my wife juggle it's remarkable. And so I've softened as I've gotten older and now seen how this goes. And we have a kind of a different relationship. My wife works full time and I take care of the kids most of the time because I'm a sportscaster nights and weekends and I'm not even working right now. So we have reverse roles in this house. So I've seen it from both sides. But yeah, you're going to lose a lot of friends. You're going to lose relationships. Your family's going to get mad at you. You're going to miss a ton of things, and you got to be willing to pay the price. And
one thing you can't miss is especially, well, I mean, as we've moved along, I would say especially if you're a freelancer, but you can't miss an assignment. You have to. You only. This is one of those professions. You don't get to miss one day. If you do miss a day, you're looking for another job.
Yeah, I remember one time our our friend, the late Rick Milkey, sent me out. He was our sports director. He sent me out to shoot highlights of a game. And on the way to the game, I didn't pay attention and the van ran out of gas. You know, it was a company van. Somebody had been driving it all day. I was in a hurry to get to the game for kickoff and ran out of gas. And so by the time I was able to get AAA out there and fill up the tank and then get to the game, it was pretty much over. It was 30-0 or something. I'd missed all the touchdowns. So all the substitutes were playing. I come back to the station and it was, you know, one of the big teams in town. And Rick looks at me and he says, "Where are my highlights?" And I said, "Well, funny thing, the van ran out of gas. And by the time I got there, it was all over." And he said, "Okay, so when I go on the air tonight, I show 2 minutes of black and say, this is where the highlights would be. Jim Watson could read a fuel gauge." And I was looking, I'm like, "But you didn't listen. The guy during the day is supposed to fill it." Nobody cares. Nobody cares. So Rick had to scramble to get something. And he told me, "You can't let that happen. You had to get to that game. You have to check these things. You can't go out at the last minute. You can't cut it so close. It's going to happen anyway in our business, but you got to look ahead. You got to be planned. You got to have a contingency
The
plan."
home viewer doesn't care.
No, they don't care. Where's my highlights? You know, again, they
I
don't
used
care.
to love to, when I was, you know, doing it, I used to love to, not love, but you take pride in the fact, never missed a deadline. Whether it was cutting a package, Daniela, you talked about cranking out a couple of stories in your first job, right? A couple of stories by whatever the deadline, that you learn to, when you're making that little bit amount of money, right? That's one of the things you learn to groove on, to get your juice on. I will not, even if it's the worst looking story, even if there's a 15-second shot in your story, right?
Get it on the air. Yeah.
Get on time. And
Don't miss slot.
Daniela she can relate to this. How many times we've been in an edit bay, you're trying to edit, you're yelling, "How much time? How much time?" And somebody's yelling to you, 90 seconds, you know, and then you got to get the tape out of the machine and run through the newsroom and pop it in another machine and hit play and hope it's queued up. And meanwhile, the anchor is begging for the video to roll. So
every second counts. Yeah.
You make it or you don't make it. And there's no explanation afterwards, right? You know,
you're late 5 minutes or 10 minutes for a meeting, depending on who your boss is and what the culture is. That can be really bad. But all right, you're late. Nothing bad happened because a meeting started late. Or
my dad used to say, missing a deadline with an excuse is just missing a deadline, because nobody cares now. It's too late. And you know, if you had one newscast that night, it's over. You're going to run it tomorrow, but everybody else had it tonight.
And it also goes, I mean, obviously it's a unique bird. It's TV. You just can't. You got to be there. It's live. Generally speaking, it's live. But also it goes to one of the biggest mantras in the business. You got to be dependable.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of people who aren't. But if you can carve, you know, half of life is just showing up. If you can carve that out, it's really good to be good. That will enable you to get to, and Daniela, you're on your way, and Jim, you've done the highest levels. We'll watch some.
I'm on my way down now, Pete. I'm on my way down.
I hope you were kind to the people that you met on the way up.
Yeah, because another thing from my dad said, you know, be nice to people on the way up, you'll see them on the way down. And it's true. I will tell you, I mean, this is just nuts and bolts stuff, but I will tell you, and Daniela can tell you too, because she was a field reporter. You better have a good relationship with your cameraman, editor. She's cutting a lot of her own stuff, but all those people, they better like you. Now, they won't sabotage you, but they just won't work as hard for you. They'll give you a C effort instead of an A effort. But I had cameramen and editors that, you know, you take out for a beer, or you just ask them about their family or how you doing, and, you know, what's going on, what are you doing on vacation? Just treat them as people, and they will break their back for you. And it makes you look better. You know, when you're standing in front of the camera, if all those people are giving you an A effort, you know, you get the reflected light from all of that. Yeah. So be nice to them. And by the way, it's just common decency. These people are doing the same thing you are. They're, you know, I used to tell people, and I still do now, when I go, I'm the last one on the crew to show up because I'm talent. I leave first and I get paid the most. So if I'm an a-hole, I'm really an a-hole then, right? These guys have been there for hours pulling cable in the mud, and they're going to be there after me and make a fraction of what I'm making. I mean, you're just a jerk if you don't appreciate that.
Yeah, and you can really, like you said, first and foremost, it's a good way to go through life. And sure, to some extent, you're the person in the suit. You can't be toting all the cable because you gotta. But you will stay. You can still set yourself apart, and it helps the shoot, and it just helps the overall the culture and the camaraderie. If you care about what the other person is going through, not just you.
Yeah, I mean, they have a name, they have a family, they're missing stuff too. You know, many times after games, I mean, I tried to do it almost every game, at least to one or two of the cameramen, I'll go over and I'll say, hey, great shot. When you got the guy's coming in for a layup and he ends up landing on you, you know, you stayed there, you hung in, that's an awesome shot you got. You know, because a lot of guys bail out and miss it or whatever. And just saying that, I've had guys 5 years later, you know, come up to me and go, I remember you complimenting me on that shot. That was great. When I told my wife, and, you know, and if you remember their name, and because I travel between cities, so I work with a lot of crews, but then I don't see them again for 9 months, even though I'll remember the guy, you know, with the big red hair behind the camera. I don't remember his name. And it's okay to go up and go, dude, I worked with you 9 months ago. Forget your name. You know, and yes, we worked on that show, and he'll tell you, you know, just be a human being. It's not that hard. It's TV.
I got a few things of yours I'm going to show, but maybe one good place to start, and you could talk a little before we show it. I'll show you when you're interviewing Kobe Bryant, but how about this, the challenge, but it goes especially in something like the sports, interviewing superstars, and you mentioned, you know, the difficulty in the case of Tiger Woods, and how do you, you know, how have you gone about that so that you're professional and you're not intimidated? And then we'll watch Kobe as an example.
Be prepared, do your homework as much as you can. Sometimes you find out the last minute. These things have been great. When I started, they didn't have these. Now you can Google somebody quickly and find stuff out right away. You know, Kobe, I worked for the Lakers for 5 years during the Kobe and Shaq years. And, you know, Kobe to me was always an enigma because, you know, he wasn't the best person. I mean, he's being treated, you know, like a saint. Now that's what, you know, he's passed. But he was a normal human being. He had his, you know, he had his dents and his scratches, and, you know, like any of us, he's not a perfect human being. And I saw some stuff that, you know, made me a little disappointed in him. But I will tell you that when they come into the arena, you know, they do the walk from their car to the locker room, and these guys walk in, they have headphones, they're ignoring us, and we're in the hallway trying to set up our interviews for pregame. And I worked with him for better part of 6 years, and every single day as he would walk into the locker room, because we were the flagship station, we covered every game, we did a pregame and a postgame, he was the star. He and Shaq were the stars. So they knew that they were a get for us. People, you know, we were going to ask for them pretty much every night. So most of the people would walk into the locker room. Shaq wouldn't even look at us. Kobe every night would walk by and he'd look at me and he'd point at me and he'd say, do you need me? And I would say yes or no like this. And if I'd say, yeah, I do. And he'd say, let me get dressed. I'll meet you shoot around 20 minutes. And I'd say, cool. And within 5 minutes of that, he would come out on the court and show up. And so to me, he was a professional. He understood he's a brand before people even use that hackneyed term now. He understood this is part of the game. And this is the way he spoke to fans before there was Twitter, you know, where it's his voice speaking directly, because we would do it live a lot of times on the pregame show, because, you know, we're running 30, 40 minutes before the game, and he would come out to warm up and we just get him over live. So he never in 6 years turned me down. And I got him on the court after games too. After every game, win or lose, the story is always Shaq or Kobe. If they won, those guys played well. If they lost, those guys played poorly. Shaq wasn't that way. Shaq was hit or miss. He was like a 12-year-old boy. He could be real playful, and then he could be sullen and sulking. Kobe was fantastic in that. Even after 3 or 4 years of covering him, he would forget my name. And as they're throwing to me, so at Staples Center, the game ends, they're playing Randy Newman, we love LA, Lakers win. And he'd look at me in the handshake line. Do you need me? Yes. And he'd come running over. You know, he's got a towel around his neck. He'd run over to me. And then you hear the PA announcer, you know, saying, because they try to time it with the announcer on air throwing to me. Bill McDonald was the play-by-play guy for Lakers. You know, Lakers win. Kobe has 38. And he's with our own Jim Watson. And the PA announcer would say, and now here's Kobe Bryant with Jim Watson. They would try to time that because my mic was not only live on air, but it was live to the arena with a 3-second delay. So you got to deal with that too. And usually in those last 5 or 10 seconds as they're introducing us, Kobe would real quickly kind of put the towel over his head like he was drying himself. And he'd look at me and say, dude, I'm sorry, I forgot your first name. And I would say, Jim. And then he would put it back down and I'd come on and say something. I'm like, you know, it was close tonight, but the Lakers win it with defense. And Kobe would look and go, Jimmy, you've been around us long enough to know. And he'd go into it. Go, oh my God, you and Kobe are boys. And there's a thing called professional distance. And it's pretty rare these days. I never wanted to have a drink with these guys. I never wanted to go out and have a meal with these guys. You don't really want to know them personally because at some point you still have to be critical of them. And if you're close with them and hanging out with them, and then you go on air and rip them, they're going to come to you the next day and go, what are you doing? I thought we were boys. Now they're mad at you. Now they don't want to talk to you. Or you're not going to be critical of them. You're going to make excuses for them. So it contaminates your critical eye. So you're not rude to them, but you're covering them. They're a subject. Now, for Daniela in Sacramento, she probably wants to have relationships with people because they're sources and they're going to float some things to her and she needs to develop that. I need that too, but I used to do that more with PR people, trainers who will give you a little side on who's injured, who's not playing, that kind of thing, and assistant coaches. Kurt Rambis used to give me a ton of stuff on the Lakers because I never burned him with it. Yeah. A lot of times it was just information so I knew what was going on and didn't get caught unprepared for something. So you develop those sources in sports too, but it's a little bit different in athletics as it is in politics.
Well, let's watch. I would show the Reggie Bush interview, but I think.
Is this the Kobe you took off my reel?
Yes.
So this is
early.
What's really interesting about this is 5 years after I had covered the Lakers in Los Angeles. I'm covering the Sonics. Sorry, the Oklahoma City Thunder used to play in Seattle, for those of you who were in third grade then. And so I was the sideline reporter for the Seattle Supersonics, and the Lakers came into town. And so I just walked up to Kobe before the game and stood under the basket. And he saw me. He's like, hey, dude, what's going on? And he walked, I think he forgot my name again. And he walked over and he said, how you doing? Where you been? I said, I work here now. And he said, that's fantastic. And I'm not kidding you. He looked at me and he goes, do you need me? And I said, I'd love to get you after the game. And he goes, meet me on the court. So I told my producer in Seattle, and he's like, you're going to get Kobe? We requested it, and they turned us down. And I said, I went to the source. And Kobe came right over after the game and did this interview with me and made me look like a hero in my new market.
Wow. Okay, is this up? Let's see.
Hey, just penetrating and getting everybody.
You guys seeing this?
Yes.
There you go. Now it's full screen.
Oh, we have such a young team, even though we're not making the playoffs. It's important for everybody to continue to work hard, continue to improve. So, I don't try to worry about my game, my offense will come. I try to keep everybody involved and, come out with a win.
Man, it's not often in an NBA game we talk about defense, but I thought the third quarter you held them scoreless first 4 minutes. That was the difference.
Especially us, because, our defensive, assignments this whole year has been absolutely terrible.
Back to the beach, Americans in the gold medal match of the second ever Olympic beach volleyball tournament. The team of Dane Blanton and Eric.
Stop it, Pete.
So
here's the thing in sports, and again, it's different than Danielle's because hers is more serious. In the sports is always the toy department. It's been called for 100 years. So one thing I really enjoy when I do an interview is to get a guy to smile, because now you've asked him something that's interesting and not just the predictable questions. And I always would look guys in the eye. I try to use something personal, something that happened with them. But a lot of guys don't want to talk about themselves. So if you can find out what's important to them, something about the game, something the way they play, or someone on their team that maybe did a small thing that is important and no one else will pick up on it, where you can break through it and you see the light in their eyes and they're like, that's great. That's what I want to talk about. And you can see in that one when I asked them about their defense. Nobody had 42 points. I asked him about defense, and his eyes lit up. Because if I ask him a question about scoring 42 points, he's going to give me a cliched answer. Nobody asked him about defense, and you can see he wanted to talk about defense because, as he said in his answer, especially their defense hadn't been any good all year long. So, I was paying attention, and that's what he liked.
You guys, please, questions either in the chat room or just throw it out to Jim and Daniela. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Jim, you've done a lot and continue to do a lot of women's sports. We're talking about being women in the business, and I know when we've gotten together over the years, you love doing mostly women's collegiate sports, right? You love doing women's sport. Also, whether it's like Division III or the not necessarily professional. Why those stories? Why did they appeal to you?
Because women are inherently better people than men. That's not a headline, is it?
Great answer. Yeah. We approve, right, ladies?
So here, yeah, there's no guys left, so we're good. So here's my analogy. Here's why women are better people, because you have empathy, and men don't know what empathy is. So if you had 10 men sitting around a table and 10 women sitting around a table, and you put a pizza down that had 8 slices, the women, no one would touch it because they would all look at it, count the slices, and then realize somebody's not going to get something. And then the women will work together, figure out how to cut it into smaller pieces and eat all of it except for the last slice, which no one will ever take. The men will, 10 guys around an 8-slice pizza, the first guy takes 2 and says, screw you, to the other guys. And then it ends up in a fight. So that's how men and women approach life. So when I started in my career, the guys in front of me, they didn't want to do women's sports. It wasn't as big, makes them look bad. It's embarrassing to their friends. Well, as my agent told me, a women's game pays just like a men's game. It's a paycheck. You're new in the business. You need reps. Go do a women's game. So early in my career, I got women's college basketball. And one of the first games I ever did was Stanford, Tennessee. And if you don't follow this, both teams ranked in the top 5. Both coaches were legendary Hall of Famers while they were still coaching. Pat Summitt for Tennessee ended up coaching an Olympic team. Tara Vanderveer for Stanford, who's still there, coaching an Olympic team. And she's also the number 3 all-time winningest coach in the history of the sport. Not women's basketball, basketball. She's won 1,100 games. She's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So one of my first games.
Trivia questions with that one. You could win some trivia contests.
Yeah. So one of my first games was Tennessee at Stanford, sold out, national TV audience. And I go in the day before, and I walk into Maples Pavilion, and Stanford's practicing, and Tennessee was just finishing. And Tara Vanderveer looks over, and she's talking with Pat Summitt at midcourt. She looks over and sees me standing in the corner of the arena. And she looks at me, and I'd never met her. And she gives me another, she goes, come over. And I walk over, and she goes, you're Jim Watson. You're calling our game. And I said, how did you know that? And she said, I looked you up. She knows what my picture looks like. And then she says, I'm Tara Vanderveer. This is Pat Summitt. They're legendary coaches. And then she says, Tara says, we'll be here for 2 hours. Why don't you go talk with Pat for a while? And Pat Summitt and I went over and sat down in the arena, and I went over a whole bunch of questions with her and topics. She had volunteered stuff. She went over my rosters with me, told me all about the players. Then she was done. I thanked her very much. She said, I'll be at the hotel. Here's my number. This is the room I'm staying in. Call me if you need anything else. I went out to Tara. She did the exact same thing. And at the end of it, I asked Tara, this has never happened to me on a men's game. Why would you guys do this for somebody like me? I'm not a big name announcer. And she said, because the women's game needs promotion. The men's game doesn't. We're growing our sport. And you're going to have a microphone in front of your mouth for 2 hours to talk about women's basketball. So the more stories we give you and the more things about the players makes them multidimensional. And now they're not just athletes, they're real people. And we think they're interesting student athletes. And again, going back to my topic, women are inherently better people, which makes them more interesting. And you'll hear me whenever I do a women's game, always talking about academics. I love to say someone's going to the free throw line. She's got, double-double. She's got 20 and 12 tonight. And she's also a 3.85 in clinical psychology.
Huh.
Who wants to do this and work with children. And no kidding, within a few weeks, I'll be walking through an airport and someone will come up to me and say, I had no idea she wanted to work with kids. That's awesome. And that's the stuff that they remember, right? It's those little things about people. Like Danielle already said it earlier, and it's the biggest lesson in journalism is always make it personal. You know, when a story is so big and unwieldy and it's just statistics and, you know, and it's initiatives and all kinds of, bring it down and make me relate to it, right? Show me somebody it affects directly. And that works in sports just as well. You know why people love sports? It's drama and adversity. And at the end, you know who won. And that's not always the case in life. There's an old saying I learned in journalism school that when you pick up a newspaper, the newspaper lists man's failures until you get to the sports section, which lists man's accomplishments. But now you have to update that and say women as well. And I was, not only did I do women's collegiate sports for many years, I was the voice of the WNBA Sparks for 5 years. And so the world has changed a lot since I was in college and since I got in this business. A lot of it for the better, but I've also been affected negatively by it. And so although I champion a lot of this, and I have 2 daughters, so I want the world to be in their favor, I lost my job at the Sparks because I'm a middle-aged white male. And I was told that's not a good look for our league anymore. I had worked for them for 5 years. Twice I'd gotten national awards, great relationships with all the coaches, many and players, many of whom I had covered in college. And this is the way the sport works. I've been in the business 30 years. I won some trophies. I've been working with this team. I did their pregame, called their games, and did their postgame. Normally that's 2 people doing that job. I did it. I traveled all over the country. I promoted the sport. When I was doing a college football game on a Saturday, I would say, hey, I'd read a promo for the Sparks, and I'd know a bunch more. And I'd say, you got to tune in on Tuesday night. Nneka Nwumek's going for her 5th double-double in a row. She's had 3 triple-doubles this year. Best player on the planet right now. You want to see it. And the WNBA loved it, all that. And here's how I got fired from the Sparks. They just stopped calling me. I was never told. My agent had to call the Sparks and get someone to tell me that they had hired my former intern who had never called a game in her life.
Because
she lasted 90 days and then quit because she couldn't do the job and went and took a job in the NBA as a sideline reporter. So, the world changed. It wasn't personal for me. They wanted a different look, but that's what happened to me when the world turned. So it happened. I just went and got some other work. It's not like I just called up the network and said, give me some more work. I mean, I got my agent on it and we went out and hit the bushes and got more gigs, but it happens. And Danielle's never been fired because she's talented, but I've been fired from 3 jobs, and it's an awful feeling. You're sitting in your car in the parking lot thinking, what do I do now? And you got to pick up the pieces. So again, that's part of treating people with decency, doing your homework, being a professional, and trying to get better. I still try to get better.
Trying to get better professionally, and it's got. I mean, you can sit here tonight and you don't talk about it matter of fact. Obviously, these were profound, and I think we could say objectively, in a better world, you're still calling Sparks games, or they certainly would have. But it can't be. You can't have arrived at this comportment, at this easily. How do you get there? That you're gonna get some good breaks in life, and then life's gonna. I think this is your line. Sometimes you're God's little cat toy.
Yeah, that is my line. Yeah, but it's good. I mean, as my dad just said, it builds character, right?
Yes.
Well, you ask a poker player, right, for a story. What's he going to tell you? About a big potty one? He's going to tell you about his bad beats because that's the one he remembers, right? So I remember that one from the Sparks because I had to chase people down to find out I was not coming back. They kept saying, "You're not fired. We're just not bringing you back." And so finally I got to somebody at the Sparks that I knew, and I said, can you tell me why? Have I done something? Did I anger someone? And that woman, who I've known for a long time and is wonderful, she said, listen, you know, this league is changing, and they don't want a middle-aged white male doing their games when they have a different agenda, and it's just business. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, and you can't make
like a mob talking to you.
you can't make a fuss about it. You can't make a fuss about it. Of course, I was pissed, you know, and they told me like a week before the first game, so I had no chance to get any other gigs during the summer. So I just went 4 months without a paycheck. And, you know, it wasn't life-changing. My wife has a job. But, you know, it was hard to stomach. But then my agent said to me, he said, look, this business, it feels very personal, but you can't take it that way. And if you make a problem about this, then nobody's going to hire you because you look like a problem. And if you start making a problem, people are going to say, well, that's why you got fired, because he's a problem. So just suck it up, Buttercup, and go find another job and do some work and wish them well. And I still know players on the team, and there's still people who work for the team that I like. So, you know, it's a lesson learned kind of thing. I got 5 years. It's okay.
Was it Al Michaels who Chick Hearn got fired after 1 year?
Yeah.
So at Al Michaels, you guys, you know, maybe.
You know what's funny? And this would be a chance to bring Daniela back in, because I wanted to ask this. When she got to Sacramento, she took a bunch of her colleagues, but they're actually your competitors, out for coffee, people that are other reporters, right, that work on the same beat as you, and yet they were willing to sit down and share with you. That's sometimes true in sports. I've always tried to be that person, helping other people and sharing information, but it's pretty cutthroat, especially now with Twitter and all this. Why did those people sit down with you? How'd you get that done?
I'm not sure. I think I was just very transparent. I was honest. I was like, hey, I've been reading a lot of your reporting. I really look up to you, and I'd love to learn things from you. And I just kind of humbled myself. And I even though I've been doing this for 5 years, that's still not a lot. But I still feel like there's so much to grow for me. I still have so much room for growth in this industry. So I'm just very transparent and vulnerable. I think maybe that's a little bit easier to do as a woman than for men. But I just was honest. I was like, hey, I don't know what you know, and I want to know what you know. Do you mind teaching me a little bit? And I was surprised. I thought in politics people were going to be a little bit more cutthroat, and they all said, you know, I won't share my sources with you.
Right. You didn't ask anyone for a phone number for.
No.
Right.
But I'll teach you, you know, a few things and how you can get there. But
so
some people won't give you the time of day, but I think most people will.
I did the Dodger pregame show for 16 years. And I got to the point where I could walk in the clubhouse pretty much anytime I wanted, even when it wasn't media availability, because I was actually an employee of the team. I found it a little bit unfair because then I had access that other media didn't have. I'd already done this in my career anyway, but when I would find something out, especially if it was a pretty big story, I would share it. Not with everybody, but I would share it with the beat writers. I would share it with guys who shared with me. And I wouldn't hold. If somebody came to me and asked me, I would tell them, even if I didn't like them and I knew that they wouldn't share with me, because then it becomes about me, right? It's what kind of person I am. So there are times I would walk to the Dodgers clubhouse and I would see somebody on the trainer's table and he's out of uniform 10 minutes before the game and he's the star and I know he's not playing. And I would walk into the press box and I would immediately go tell 3 or 4 of the, obviously the team cleared this. I didn't, bring something out that they weren't aware I was taking out of the clubhouse. But I would go to the beat writers and say, hey, did you know Kershaw's not pitching tonight? And I have no idea. I go, he's on the training table. He's got bursitis. They're going to hold him. He's going to miss a start and be back 5 days. And they would just, you're awesome. Thank you. And then they're knocking it into a story. They're picking up their phone. They're tweeting it out. And what was awesome is then I knew I was bulletproof, that when I missed a big story or I didn't know what was going on, one of these guys would whisper in my ear and save me. And so I thought, much better that we all have it than I have it sometimes and not have it other times. It seemed to work better for me that way. So I cultivated relationships with guys. There were some guys who didn't want to play that game. I left them alone. They didn't share with me, so I didn't share with them. But I never withheld. If they had asked me, I would have told them.
Yeah, and I think it's always also empathetic. There you go, Jim. It was empathetic of you because you knew maybe you had a little inside advantage And so,
It's unfair.
and a lot of them are old school from a time when nobody had an advantage and it was all about beating the other person. So you put yourself in their shoes.
Peyton has a question.
Hi. I'd like to ask you just two quick questions. First of all, you mentioned the Seattle Supersonics and how they transitioned to Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm from Oklahoma. Huge Thunder fan. I love the Thunder. Grew up watching them. I remember when the Hornets, it was like the OKC Hornets.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess my first question is, have you gotten to interview any Thunder players?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I knew when Westbrook was there. I knew Westbrook when he was at UCLA. So, yeah, and I'll tell you, Oklahoma City's a great story, the town, the team, and all this, because when Katrina hit New Orleans, the NBA needed a place for that team to play, and they sent them to Oklahoma City. And that town, knowing that team was only loaned to them, sold out every game. So while that's going on, in Seattle, because now you know with the Chaz and the Chad, and now you know what Seattle's all about, sports is not the biggest thing in Seattle. So they wouldn't build the Supersonics a new arena. They play in Key Arena, which is right underneath the Space Needle. And it was a dated arena. So the NBA was trying to force Seattle to build a new arena, and they wouldn't do it. So when the New Orleans team, because of Katrina, moved to Oklahoma City and was selling out, and they'd be leaving Oklahoma City, and Seattle won't build a new arena and is not selling out, there was a little deal done, right? Clay Bennett, you know that name?
I know his sons, yeah.
So Clay Bennett is the owner of the Oklahoma City Thunder, but Clay Bennett bought them when they were the Seattle Supersonics. So I'm the sideline reporter, and we hear this guy Clay Bennett is coming into town to take a look at the team. He's going to make a bid. And so I start doing my homework, and Clay Bennett lives in Oklahoma City. He has 5 partners. They all live in Oklahoma City. And so within 2 or 3 days, I started talking on air about the fact Supersonics are probably looking to move to Oklahoma City because the owner is from there. And why would you spend $250 million, and that was a lot in those days, to buy a basketball team in Seattle if you live in Oklahoma City? So we were in front of that. Stephen A. Smith stole it from me, never gave me the credit. And so you could see it setting up. And then what shocked me is people in Seattle were completely flummoxed when they announced they're moving to Oklahoma City. What did you think they're doing? Howard Schultz, who owns Starbucks, was the owner of the team, had no interest in basketball, did a favor to the city of Seattle and to the NBA, buying the team from this long-term family that owned it. They wanted out. He bought it as a caretaker, saying, find a new owner. He says, I'm opening 25,000 Starbucks in China next year. I have no time for a basketball team. But he bought it, and he was dumping it. He was getting rid of it. The NBA was putting pressure on the city of Seattle, build an arena. It didn't work out. Anyway, that's one of those things where you just had to stop and just look at the writing on the wall. It was probably one of my bigger scoops, and Stephen A. got all the credit.
That's so annoying that he stole that from you.
That's
but
all right. Bigger money.
You had a second question.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up on that. Thank you for giving me that insider scoop. Yeah, obviously, the Thunder did a lot of good things for our city. It kind of gave us a rebirth. So put us on the map. I'm really happy to hear that.
You guys deserve to have that team. Seattle wasn't taking care of it.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we have them finally. And I guess my second one, just in general, and obviously I'm sure you get this question a lot. Who was your all-time favorite interview? You were just obsessed with them. They were so cool.
I got to interview Pele when he was the #1 soccer player in the world. Yeah, he was doing a tour.
How do you know about Pele?
I know plenty of things you would not realize.
Yeah, these guys probably wouldn't know, but there was a time when Pele you could go to the biggest city in the world, the smallest village, anywhere, and just say the name Pele, and everybody knew who he was. And you'd see Pele jerseys everywhere. And he was doing it. And it's funny, Pete, it happened. I got my interview at OCN. And it was he was doing a tour. The World Cup was coming to the United States, and he was doing a tour for Visa and MasterCard. And so he was doing the rounds, and I just put my name in, and I got picked somehow, and I got to sit down with him. And when I was doing my interview with him, there must have been 50 other cameras stealing my interview, right here, lenses with boom mics dropped in, and we have our little tunnel. And I got him for, 15, 20 minutes. And, he was a guy I grew up, emulating, watching, idolizing. So he was the first guy that I interviewed that was enormous. I got to interview Muhammad Ali, which was fantastic because he's somebody who's stepped outside of sports and changed the world as well. You know, I once interviewed a guy named Larry Doby, who, that could be another trivia question for you, Pete. A guy named Larry Doby, black guy, played baseball in the 60s and challenged a thing called the reserve clause, which led to free agency.
Well, you're talking about Kurt Flood.
Kurt Flood, I'm sorry. What did I say? Larry Doby?
Larry Doby was the first black in the American
player
League.
in the American League. Sorry. Kurt Flood. And Kurt Flood challenged this reserve clause, ended up sacrificing his own career, never got the money. And it's amazing to me that there are baseball players today who are making $20 and $30 million a year and have never heard of Kurt Flood.
I know.
And that's tragic. It'd take 5 minutes to, he's the reason that they make the money. He's sacrificed himself. You know, there's a great saying, the first guy through the wall always gets bloody. And that was Kurt Flood. And nobody even knows who he is. He's like a footnote in history. But I think the one that probably meant the most to me was when I was in college, and it wasn't even the athlete, it was the athlete's wife, because the athlete had passed away. I interviewed Rachel Robinson, who was Jackie Robinson's wife. And I was doing my senior thesis at SC, and my professor said, you need to pick something really interesting because sports kind of bores you. And it's true, I'm not a huge sports fan, which is ironic, but I like people and I like stories about people, and sports is just the vehicle in which I meet them and tell their stories. And so I knew, obviously, Jackie Robinson had died years earlier. And I wrote to Rachel Robinson and asked her if she would sit down with me. And she did. I went to USC, and so she met me at the Museum of American History across the street. And I thought, well, that's a nice place to meet. And the reason she met me there, she walked me through there and showed me how Black people have been treated in the United States. And she said, you need to understand this before I sit down and tell you this story. And so she walked me through this museum. Obviously, I'm from Orange County. Look at me. And I thought I knew this stuff, but I didn't know it from somebody who had lived it, somebody who had paid a price. And I walked through it. And by the time I finished the tour with her, I was in a whole different place to do this interview. And so most of the interview I did with her, and I did it on a tape recorder, it was just for a paper at school, was asking her what that was like. And she said, the hardest thing for Jackie was to play in a game at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, where the Dodgers used to play, and hit the game-winning home run and have the crowd cheer and chanting his name, and he disappears into the dugout. And then the fans would leave, and she said she would go outside and be on the street waiting for him to come out of the clubhouse, and he'd come out and showered in a suit, and she said we would walk 25 feet, and some of those same fans would then start hurling N-bombs at him. And she said, how can that dichotomy exist where you love him in one place and you hate him so much in another because he's the same guy? And she couldn't even answer the question herself. And she told me a ton of stories like that and how they were treated and when they went on the road and going to places, Cincinnati and Boston and, towns that were the last to integrate, and how difficult that was for them as a family and how much pressure it put on them as a husband and wife, their children, the death threats, all these things that, we're so lucky we don't deal with so many of these things. But it opened up my eyes, and, this would have been 1989, 1988 when I'm doing this interview with her. So this was a long time before all of this stuff has changed now in the world, all this social justice. And I just did a webcast, a CNN webcast a couple of weeks ago, where it was 5 people on, and I was the only white person on the show. And they asked me what I thought of all this. And I said, I have no idea what I think because my view is completely different. I don't know what it's like to go into a store and be looked at with suspicion. I don't know what it's like to look in my rearview mirror at midnight and see a police car behind me. I don't know. So, and getting back to the word I mentioned earlier, I can have sympathy, but I can't have empathy because I don't know how it feels. I can try to put myself in those shoes. And I had done that same thing when I wrote the paper, and I tried to kind of write it from Jackie Robinson's point of view, because you can imagine how conflicted he must have been to go back to the stadium the next day and make those same people happy again. And the amazing thing, and the reason Jackie Robinson was picked to break the color line in baseball, was because Branch Rickey, the general manager, didn't think he was the best player, but thought he was the best person to handle it. Because he said, I don't need a fighter. I need someone who won't fight, because you got to take it and turn the other cheek, because you can't give them another reason to hate you, and just play as hard as you can and as well as you can. And even his own white teammates didn't like him. You know, there's a famous story. Pee Wee Reese, who was the star of that team, admits that he was racist before Jackie Robinson came. You remember, there are no black players in Major League Baseball. And he said, for weeks, I wouldn't talk to him in the clubhouse, and I hoped that he would make errors and get sent down and we wouldn't have to deal with this. And then they were in Cincinnati, and the crowd was booing and throwing things and yelling just obnoxious stuff and throwing, you know, all kinds of things on the field. And Pee Wee Reese looked around at the stadium and figured, wow, this is just how I was, you know, 5 minutes ago. It's now just opening up to me. I see what's going on. He walked over and he put his arm around his teammate. He didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. Jackie put his arm around his teammate, and the stadium went quiet because Pee Wee Reese was a hero. And people were, what is he doing? And he stood up for his teammate. And they were never the best of friends, but he said, you know, this is my teammate, you know, and I'm white, he's black, but we're both blue because we're Dodgers, and you're not going to treat my teammate like that. I remember seeing an interview that Pee Wee Reese did years later, and he said, I just felt bad for him. He was standing there. He was standing in the middle of 50,000 people, and I've never seen someone so alone before.
You know what the most magnanimous part of Rachel Robinson giving you that interview was? That you were from USC.
And Jackie Robinson went to UCLA. It's making a joke there.
Danielle, it's hard to maybe think of it on the spot. You mentioned covering the Pope, but do you have a person or that you know is most memorable or stands out to you?
There's a few people that I would say, I always like to say that the most ordinary people have the most extraordinary stories. And it's people who you would just never think like, wow, they're going to just help me learn a different perspective that I would have never learned otherwise. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Golden State Killer case. He's this serial killer, this awful person who killed 12 people, murdered over 50 women in California, all throughout throughout the state in the 70s and 80s. So I was reporting in Sacramento when he was arrested. And again, CNN, NBC, all the networks were in Sacramento for this story. And everyone was focusing on him and all the brutal crimes that he committed. And I had interviewed one of the first female detectives in Sacramento. And I asked her, I was like, is there anything that we're missing in this, you know, there's so much coverage, anything that someone hasn't asked you? She's like, you know, no one's really focusing on the victims, on these survivors. And then I was like, you know, you're right. We're all focusing on, you know, how gruesome he was and how he got arrested. And a lot of people thought he was dead, this and that, because it was super interesting. And it was a huge national story. So then I called the next day. I was like, Carol, you mentioned like, you know, we haven't let the survivors tell their story. I was like, do you know anyone who might be willing to share their story? She's like, let me call her and ask her. And so she got me in touch with a few survivors, few women who were now okay to talk about it. And I don't know, again, kind of going back to when Jim asked me, how do you approach people? How do you approach interviews with people who just lost a family member? They're tough things to talk about, but they also had such an important message to share. And a lot of them have been years and they've gone through a lot of healing, and they just had this was post Me Too movement, such powerful message for women, if you've been through a similar situation, to speak up. And then they're just after everything they've been through, it's just hard to believe that they could be so forgiving. And of course they were still very angry and had a lot of had their own feelings about how they felt about this guy, but they were just so resilient. And so being able to share those stories of resiliency and just how someone who went through the worst of anything you can go through can still come out to be a good human being. And what these women had to say was, you know, if I had let him destroy my life, he would have won. But this made me stronger. This made me better. This made me tough. So it was really powerful for me to highlight several of these women who people kind of, not that they didn't care about their stories. And HBO later did this documentary with them, what's it called, like Alone in the Dark or something. Yeah, it's super good. But what is it called?
All be gone in the dark.
All be gone in the dark. But one of them told me, she's like, I'm only going to do interviews with you because you really listen. And so I think just earning someone's trust feels really rewarding, because there are hard things to talk about. And so stories like that, I'm really proud of, to be able to have given that person a platform to share something like that.
I hope everybody heard the word she used when she does interviews: listen. Because you really only need to think of your first question, and then every other question comes out of their answers if you're listening. I mean, I've seen people say extraordinary things in an interview, and the interviewer is already thinking about his next question and misses it completely and goes on. And you're at home saying, did he hear what he just said? And react to it. One thing I love that has changed since I've been in TV, and it's on the news side, is how we all used to know the names of the serial killer and nobody knew the name of the victims. And now they don't read those names anymore, right? When there's a school shooting, they don't say the kid's name anymore. And I think if you do that, and it should have happened years ago, you'd probably take away a lot of the incentive for some of these people that are just crying out for attention and want to go out in a blaze of glory and be known. The problem is the internet still gets their name and puts it out there and everybody knows it. But, to this day, you can ask somebody on the street, name one of the Columbine killers, and they'll know at least Klebold or Harris. Right. And then I'll ask, how about one of the victims? Nobody can name a victim.
Yeah, I met him when I was teaching at Chapman. He's done his name's Charlie Min, former sportscaster, and found that, he wanted to, so he, remember the Indiana Pacer forward Dale Davis, Jim? The Davis brothers?
Right, yeah.
This guy Charlie, he was in Cleveland, so he'd made it, top 10 market, he's doing sports, but he wanted to do, the first one, he decided he wanted to do documentaries on mass murders or serial murders. I actually did a couple on El Chapo, and he wanted to do them. So, and he's done one on the one at Mandalay Bay. What did they come to be known as? The
name of the country concert, right?
Right. To remember the victims. And Dale Davis, the Indiana Pacer, I mentioned him, he financed his first movie, and so he finds, and it's a 3-person team, but his sole reason for doing these, and he did one, and one of the first one he wanted to do the most was this mass murder at McDonald's down in Yes, like 30 people. Was it? I think maybe now I think it was supplanted by the one at Mandalay Bay at the country concert. But that's why to remember, never mentions who the killer was. Always talks about the victims.
He's in El Paso, right, Pete?
It was in San Isidro.
He lives in El Paso.
Exactly. He just did one, exactly, Daniela, at the Walmart, right? The Walmart.
Yeah, he did.
Yep, I think that's Charlie's latest. But I mean, and he lives in El Paso. What an interesting thing to dedicate your life to, in fact, or certainly redirect your career.
Just the other night on Netflix, I watched the Ted Bundy thing that everybody's watching, and like everybody else, I'm fascinated by evil. You want to see the face and see if you can figure it out, and there's no figuring it out. And he was a criminal mastermind because he could blend in so well and be so charming and all this. And as I went through it, they hardly even mentioned or spent any time on the victims, who they were. And, they were so fascinated with him. They just kept going. And we've been over that ground so many times. I know that. And I know you have to deal with that. But at the same time, like at Florida State, he murdered like 3 sorority girls, and they put up all 3 of their pictures at once and then took them down and went back to him. And I don't know. It just kind of struck me when I was watching it. And it made me think of it right now.
Well, and I think there's also a point, like, you don't be afraid to think independently. It's so, it's so easy to do those stories. Of course, I don't know, as Danielle was talking about the Golden State Killer, actually I was getting between that one, him, and the BTK.
BTK. Yeah, BTK.
and everyone does those stories that kind of like you said, both of you said, the same way. And BT to bite, bound, torture, kill was right.
Yeah, torture. What was the B for?
Google
it. I don't remember.
I think it was bind. He kills almost the whole household, and the only mention was that he almost, but for like the son and daughter, and you never hear any more about. And the whole time I'm thinking, well, what was this household? What was their? You know
where this started, Pete, in my opinion, was Truman Capote in Cold Blood, right? Because his whole thing was focusing on the killers, not so much on the family. I mean, he talked about
them heroic, those two guys, in a way. But exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. You just made me think of another thing, and maybe we can segue away from serial killers. I've never had to make that segue before, but in this business, it's funny, you guys. You'll get a job, and I'd love to hear what Daniela thinks of this. And they hire you, and a lot of times they'll tell you, you stood out, you're different, you're unique, you're unusual. Now do it just like this. So there's a guy in Los Angeles. He started as my intern, and then he was a sideline reporter for me for high school football. And the reason we hired him is he was unlike anybody had ever been on television. He was funny. He was self-deprecating. He was really well-read. He had a lazy eye, a chipped tooth with a space. He had a dead guy's bone in his ankle. And he was the captain of the two worst football teams in USC history. His name is Petros Papadakis. Petros starts, he's got wild hair. He doesn't know how to do a tie, so his suit's a mess. He's down on the sideline. First time I threw to him at a high school football game, he ate an entire hot dog in one bite during his very first hit. And I'm in the press box, and I'm like, my producer goes, "What is this guy?" And I said, "He is fantastic," is what he is. "Have you ever seen this?" And Petros went up the ladder quickly and got hired to college football for Fox Sports. And I told Petros, and I know him to this day, he's a friend of mine, they're going to love how different you are, and they won't be able to help themselves. They're going to change you and make you conform. They're going to just start filing off the rough edges, and then they're going to start sanding and cutting, and by the time they're done, you're going to look like everybody else. And 5 years later, I remember walking through an airport, and I glanced up at a TV as I was headed for my gate. He was doing an open for college football, and he's on camera, and he's in a beautiful suit with a perfect knot, and his hair is short and slicked back, and he's wearing makeup, and he's doing all the hand gestures. And I said, "Oh no, they ruined him." And I texted him, and I said, "Don't you remember what I told you?" And he texted back to me during the first commercial break, "Don't worry, Waddy. They haven't changed me. I'm still the same guy." And he's still different. He's got a radio show in Los Angeles to this day, every day, Monday through Friday. It's the #1 sports show in Los Angeles. At least it was recently. But don't let them change you. If somebody keeps trying to change you, it's because they want to be more comfortable. People have an idea, like Daniela and I were talking about the voice. Oh, that's how it's always been, so that's the way it's always got to be. Be different. Be you. Be your own voice. Do it your own way. If they can't appreciate you, then move on and do it somewhere else. But I hate when people cave and sell out, and just, be an original, as you go through life, no matter what you do. We got a guy here that picks up trash. He's fantastic, to the point my daughters run to the window to watch. He picks it up by himself. The arm comes out of the truck. He picks it up, dumps it, puts it back down. But he's inside the cabin. He's dancing. He's out the window, and he's hitting all the levers. He's got style. There's music going on. My kids watch every time. And my dad always used to say, whatever you do, be the best at it. And that guy's the best trash man I've ever seen. He's fantastic.
I was watching, it's funny, because Petros, he does that Sunday night show with Fred Rogan, and I was doing something else, and I heard the voice. You recognize his, very distinct voice.
Yeah, he's got a bad voice. He's got a lisp. All the things that shouldn't work in TV. And they do, because if you're watching, you relate to him, because he's not perfect. He's not the Ken doll reading the teleprompter. He's a mess, just like you and me. And that's why people love him.
But you know what? I looked up, Jim, and He's slender now. He was well dressed. I would not have recognized him to look at the place.
Married now. He's married now, so his wardrobe's better, his hair's better, his diet's better.
Yeah. He's not Petros anymore.
When I got married, I had 25 suits in my closet. I still have 25 suits in my closet, but there are different 25 suits. Mine just kind of slid down like this. One would go out and a new one would come in. I didn't even know. It was subtle. It was genius. I don't know how she did it. It was a magic trick. It was a Jedi mind warp. I hope she's not listening.
To wrap this up, thank you both for spending all this time. Much appreciated. Daniela is there, and then Jim, you. Is there an end game? Is there a brass ring for you in the business?
Go ahead, Daniela.
You know, before I thought I wanted to be a network correspondent, so that means you're traveling a lot, and not if I got a job offered, I would take it, of course, but because I feel like I've been able to do a lot of great things in my career, and I have sacrificed a lot of family time. I'm happy where I am. I'd like to grow more as a political reporter. And if there's an opportunity to come back to Los Angeles, whether that's staying with Spectrum or I'm not sure. I think for now, like I'm in a good place in my career, and I now want to prioritize my personal life. So for me, it's important to have a job where I can be there for my future kids in like 5 years and not have a job that's so demanding. This job is demanding as it is, and being a network correspondent takes everything. And it doesn't mean that I'm not hungry for this career anymore, but I just think my priorities have changed a little bit. So I'm not sure. I'm open to different possibilities, but I'm really happy where I am. And if I ever get stagnant or a little bit too comfortable, I know I'll move on to something else, but I think I'm in a good place right now.
Jim, when you grow up, do you know?
You know, my dad always used to say, when you make a plan for the future, make it in pencil.
Yeah.
Change, right? And it's true. And my wife has taught me this too. Sometimes you got to let life happen to you a little bit. Right? If you're so focused on one direction, you're going to miss something over here. So, you know, as one of the great philosophers of our time, Ferris Bueller said, fast, you better slow down and smell the roses. You're going to miss it. Right? So I'll tell you what, you know, I've already done my thing, and, you know, I've been on national and I've done Olympics and made my money and done all that stuff and gotten all the attention I would need for a lifetime. What I'd really like to do is a talk show, and it would be a general knowledge talk show. Like you guys are pretty young, so you probably don't know this guy exists, but there's a guy named Tim Conway Jr. who's on in Los Angeles every night. He's on KFI, 6:40 a.m. And he comes on the air from, 7 to 10 o'clock at night. And he has really no topic in mind. He jumps around. I've heard him, talk about politics. I've heard him talk about sports. A couple of weeks ago, he did an hour with Rick Monday, who was an old Dodger player, who's now their radio announcer. And they just talked about old Dodger games. Then one night he had somebody on, he was talking about Biden and Trump. And then one night he was on and he's watching monitors in the studio, and there was a car chase in LA. And he and his news person and the weather person and the traffic person, they're all watching, they're all joking around. They're like, I know where that is. And there's an In-N-Out burger right there. And I was listening into my car driving home from Orange County. It was fascinating. It was like sitting in a bar, and the table right next to you were a bunch of really interesting, funny people. And you were just listening in the whole time. But he kind of lets his show happen, and he'll take callers if it slows down, and they'll direct him in different angles of things and different topics. And to me, it's brilliant because it keeps him interested, because he comes to work every night not knowing what he's going to talk about. His father was famous. He was a famous comedian. He was on the Carol Burnett show and all this. So he's got a good sense of humor. But I just like the fact that you never quite know what you're going to hear. And some nights it doesn't work, and that's part of experimenting. And some nights it's fabulous. And so I always tune it in when I'm on a long drive just to see what's going to come up. And I know him, so I can text him and throw something in if I have something to add to the topic. And I don't know, to me, if you try to strangle life a little bit too much, you miss too much. Just let it happen. See what happens, because it'll take you in some strange directions. The last thing, and I'll get out of the way, I promise. My last 2 Olympics, so I've done different sports. I've done 4 Olympics. I've done 5 sports. And my last 2 Olympics, And now the number one sport that I call is gymnastics. I don't look like a gymnast. I was never a gymnast. I don't know very much about gymnastics, but nobody else would do it when it first became a big TV sport. So I said, well, how many are there? And they said, there's 20 of them, 20 paychecks. I'll learn it. So a lot of the other guys, well-established guys with a name, they didn't want to do it. They look silly. I said, I'll do it. I always look silly. So I went and did it. And the gymnasts were so happy to have someone that was trying to learn their sport. They helped me and they taught me right on the air, and I would learn things. And I'll never know all the moves. They're all named after, dead Russians. You're never going to figure out what all these things mean. But I don't have to know the answers. I only have to know the questions. And so it is amazing to me that the number one sport, so that therefore the thing I make the most money off of, is a sport I never played, have very little knowledge of, and didn't ask for. It just fell into my lap because I let life happen to me. And now I've done 2 Olympics, and I'll probably do Tokyo the same way.
You could not have handicapped that. You could.
No.
Life's what happens while you make plans.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, thank you very much. Jim Watson, Daniela, former student, thank you very much. All the best to both you guys. I'll send the next quiz tomorrow. Thanks for joining us tonight. And everybody have a great evening.
Thanks, you guys, for sitting through
Bye,
that.
everyone.
When you're big, remember me. I'm still going to need a job.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Go study.
Great to see you. Almost meet your daughter, Jim. Have a great night.
I'm in the guest suite, Pete. This is where you'd stay.
One day, before the year's out.
All right, man.
Thank you.
See you later.
You got it.